The deadline for Formula One's much vaunted new regulations is October the 31st. That's when the final set of rules needs to be locked in for 2021. Now, I'm joined by Gary Anderson to talk about these rules and some of the problems that are emerging. Now, this was talked about as a clean sheet of paper, the reinvention of Formula One, removing the long-standing problems and making everything perfect again. But gradually, over time, we seem to be seeing all these proposals being watered down, the latest one being that the plan to ban tyre blankets has been put back. That was originally going to be 2021. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I always expected everything to get diluted, I must admit, because, there's no interest for the big teams to accept change. They've got a handle on what's going on right now, Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes, really. So why should they agree to change in the regulations? Why should they agree to changing everything when perhaps one team or even a smaller team might just get it right and might just become pretty strong competition? So I never expected it to go through with the big plan that they have. Hopefully, a bit will be accepted. As I said, one of the most important things for me would be trying to get the cars aerodynamically a little bit more stable in traffic. And for me, a simple sort of solution to that is a less complicated front wing, less pieces, just quite simple. The rules are quite good the way they are, just less pieces. At the moment, you're allowed 5 flaps, make it 3, something like that, and a better underfloor. So if they did that, I think that would be a major step. But I don't think, what we've seen with this stylistic car that they brought out is that that's okay before you get, 1,000 clever engineers rushing around it trying to find the loopholes. And that's what everybody's worried, that somebody will find that loophole like we did years ago with the double diffuser or stuff like that. So disappointed that the ruling body, the FIA and Formula One as it is now, don't control the formula the way they used to do. It's in the team's hands, and the teams have got too strong a say in things. They should all be working together for a start, but then on top of that, the FIA and Formula One should make the final decisions as to what's going on. But it's not like that. The teams seem to have too much control.
But you say the teams won't accept these changes if it goes against them. But is there not also an element to which the teams that participate in Formula One need to look towards the collective good? Because even though it might make life a little bit harder for them in the short term, everybody involved wins if Formula One thrives, which is what the 2021 regulations was supposed to be about. Yeah,
but I think we have to look very closely and say, is it broken? It's not perfect on every occasion, but we've had some good races as well. So we've got to take in those good races and those bad races and see what the difference is. We want to close the competition up, and by changing all the regulations, you will inevitably, for at least a year, open it all up a bit. So the mid teams will fall back a bit because there's no magic in it. It's just the bigger teams with more money, more manpower, more facilities will exploit a set of regulations better than a smaller team. So for a small team, you have to be very, very lucky to get the whip hand. I wouldn't expect that to happen, but it could happen. But normally, it'll just exaggerate it.
But the interesting thing is that one of the objections to some of the changes appears to be, and this is certainly the case with the getting rid of the ban on tyre blankets, is that they didn't want to change too many things at once because there's so many unknowns. When it comes to tyres, they're going to 18-inch wheels, low-profile tyres, all these aero changes, etc. So they want to eliminate unknowns. But how can you have a clean sheet of paper without unknowns? So for me, the concern is, have they kind of pulled a little bit too far back from what needs to be done? Or is it just a question of they're not hitting the things that really needed to change in the first place, perhaps not necessarily within the bounds of the technical regulations, and therefore they're hoping some of these changes would do things that they can't do? Anyway, I'm talking obviously there about the financial situation.
Yeah, I mean, the financial situation, from my point of view, is the biggest divider between the teams. It needs to be sorted out. I think Formula One teams put on a huge effort. They should be paid a certain amount of money to show up at all the Grand Prix. And you might get a little bit more if you're willing to sign up for 3 years or 5 years or something like that. But then it's down to prize money, and your points is worth money. Whereas at the minute, some of the teams get a huge amount of money just for being there, and some of the teams don't, and that will always be a divide. The thing about the tyre blankets, it's the reason behind it you got to look at, because not having tyre blankets will mean the cars will have to do a few more laps to get the tyres warmer, good in a race whenever you have a strategy and you come out of the pits and your tyres aren't up to temperature to work, and the guy coming around who's done one more lap, his tyres are warm, so it's good for that. It's bad for during practice because you will have to do more laps. It'll cost you more money as such because there's more mileage going on all the parts of the car. So you need to do things for the right reasons. I think limiting the tyre blankets would be a pretty reasonable thing. I mean, these teams have got 20 sets of tyre blankets between two cars, at least. All the generators to drive all that stuff, the power required for 20 cars, it's a huge amount. So you could limit it, allow them to have the 3 or 5 sets in blankets or something like that, just to control it a little bit. So it's not like you don't need to just put the light switch on. You can turn the dimmer down a bit and see what happens. But as I say, the teams will never agree to anything because they don't want change.
There's also a proposal to have 3 experimental races next year whereby the grid is determined by a qualifying race run in reverse championship order. Now, the idea is these will happen at Paul Ricard, Spa and Sochi. Now, in order for this to happen, the teams need to be unanimous in support of it. They're not necessarily at this stage unanimous because there's concerns that it might not work as was hoped. But is this another example of perhaps F1 being too resistant to what Ross Brawn's described as experiments? It's not kind of locking it in for every race. It's something they want to try to see what happens.
Now, whenever we see a car going to the back, their initial racing is with slow cars. So initially you get those first 5, 6, 8, 10 places very, very quickly. It wouldn't be like that with a reverse grid. So the teams don't want to do that because that means they don't know what sort of a car to design. At the minute they know what car to design, a car that will be fast, get on pole position and you win races. So they'll fight that one for sure. I think it would be a fantastic idea. 3 races out of 21 I think it is next year, or 22. I don't think it's enough. I think we should sort of go 50-50 with the season at least and just make it a mix. Take the tracks like Monaco where overtaking is nigh on impossible, then don't do it there. But instead of nominating some tracks, just make sure you denominate the ones that the overtaking is impossible on.
So big picture, do you think 2021 is going to work? There's pushback from teams because they're worried that the regulations will be too restrictive, but at the same time, if you want to make sure that aerodynamically the cars can follow closely, and there's been some very good research into this, some promising proposals, does it not follow that you have to have them restrictive to stop teams doing things that will make the cars more sensitive? Where does that push and pull stop? And is that what's going to prevent the 2021 regulations being as comprehensive and effective as they perhaps should be?
It's a difficult one to answer because, again, the car I've seen or the design I've seen, and I haven't seen all the detail of it and all the research they've done, but the car I've seen is a styling exercise, which is fine. It's great. That gives you a place to start with. But it's the detail that makes the car. It's the detail that will make the car being able to be better in traffic. For example, we always see the fast cars, the Mercedes, the Ferrari. When they get in traffic, they struggle more than the Racing Point or the Toro Rosso, just because they're producing more downforce. That's what makes them a fast car. And whenever they get in traffic, they suffer more. Now that percentage is something that's a difficult thing to quantify, to be honest, because initially, whenever you get in the wake of a leading car, it reduces your drag because the weight's quite high. The rear wing on the following car gets affected first, and then as you get closer, it affects the whole car, and when you get very close, it really affects the front wing. So it needs to be sort of thought about what you're really trying to do. But once the engineers get a handle on those regulations, the cars will still all be different, and they will still all suffer the same consequences. You might have 50% less downforce to start with, but the downforce is still critical. While a car's grip level is driven by aerodynamics, you will always suffer when you're in turbulence from the car in front of you.
So final summary, how optimistic are you about the regulations that will be finalised at the end of this month? Do you think it's going to be a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Personally, I think it'll be a thumbs down because the big boys don't want it to change. Ferrari has this veto on the regulations, so unless you get them on your side, you're going to struggle to begin with. But I think it'll be a diluted diluted set of regulations. And as I say, from my point of view, a lot of attention to the front wing and create an underbody that's more powerful aerodynamically would be a solution to a good compromise.